Welcome to everyone joining us around the world for this year's International Women's Day event. This year's theme is Embracing Equity. My name is Catherine Dixon and I'm Ciarb's Director General. Equity seems a simple concept, but what does equity mean in practice? Sometimes we think to achieve equity, we simply need to treat everyone the same. However, treating everyone the same without acknowledging and considering diversity and differences does not result in equity. We need to consider the barriers some individuals and groups face and take steps to address them, thereby creating a fairer world for all. It's important to recognize the inequalities women face, to acknowledge that gender is also intersectional and that women as a group are truly diverse. Intersectionality is how aspects of gender of an individual's identity combined to create different types of discrimination and privilege. We know that equity is important to Ciarb's members globally as well as to society, but we also know that we still have a long way to go to achieve parity. Although the number of women Ciarb members has increased, we do not yet have parity with men. We are therefore taking steps to improve the diversity of our appointments at our events, to grant access to training and to support initiatives which promote greater gender parity and fairness in our sector, including the equal representation in arbitration and equal representation of expert witness pledges, amongst others. So today's discussion is about moving from equality to equity and acknowledging that there cannot be one approach to achieve diversity and equity. Before our panel discussion, we will hear a short introduction from our president and then see a short film on embracing equity, in which we have interviewed women in dispute resolution from around the world and asked them about their experiences of equity and how we can advance and uplift women in the dispute resolution community. This is what they said.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It is my privilege and honor to bring greetings as we at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators celebrate International Women's Day 2023 and salute all women, in particular those in all areas of our industry. We look forward to stimulating discussions, conversations, and considerations around such core topics like equity and how it differs from equality. We anticipate a conversation that speaks to equity beyond gender, racial, social mobility, intersectionality. I look forward to the perspectives that will be put forward in bringing to the fore how our actions towards equity can improve access to justice and what we as men in this industry and other male allies can do to uplift and advance our female colleagues. My dear friends, as we prepare to enjoy the feast of knowledge from our esteemed panel, I invite you all to sit back, enjoy, digest, and be energized. I wish for us all an enlightening, stimulating, and invigorating session. And I thank you, my fellow ADR practitioners, for your service and commitment. And may God bless you all.
Equity is about realizing that every person comes at life from a different starting point and trying to find ways to ensure that they can still have the same opportunities to achieve. To do that, we need to be honest about how different people experience the world and make an effort to break down the barriers that impede them in their journey, whether those are large or small. I have seen women in my professional life championed based on their merits to take on roles that they would not have thought were available to them because of the constraints of their personal situation or for other reasons. I have also had the experience as a young practitioner of being the only woman in the room and having my opinion actively sought out when I would not otherwise probably have felt comfortable speaking up in that environment. I also remember having a colleague call out another colleague for making a gender-based assumption about the approach that I took to expressing an opinion. And these may seem like small things, but they are important. They indicate to others in the room that the value of all views should be recognised, and they set the standard for how to ensure that they are.
We know that women have an important role to play in society and in justice. And we have been quite comfortable with an idea that says equality is equity. But as we have looked around the world in the last 100 years, we have seen that mere equality is not enough. Equity is a thing. Because what equity does, it looks at fairness, it looks at justice, it looks at barriers to equality that may exist, and then must look at ways of overcoming that. In my own professional life, I've been fortunate to have had mentors and to have had access to quality education. Those have helped me very much in overcoming some of the barriers. But there are some softer things, including mentorship, I want to talk about. So when I became an attorney, first of all, my class in law school had more women than men. So that was quite a transition. But the profession was still predominantly male. So in the last 40 years, we have seen that transition where there are a lot more women in the profession. And as a result, maybe building of confidence among women to take on certain positions as presidents, committee chairs, committee members, and team leaders in their firms to try to access things like arbitration training, mediation training, and to deliver those services. Don't give up being a woman to participate in the space. Use the woman's skills, and often those are derided and misunderstood in popular talk. But I mean the ability to listen, I mean empathy, good decision-making, multitasking, all of those have been important for me and many other women I know in coming into positions of leadership.
I really wish I had lots of experiences and anecdotes or instances I could readily access and describe where I could say I've witnessed equity in practice in my personal professional life. Sadly, however, I don't seem to. The truth is, and I'm sure there have been moments in equity, if you will, but they're outnumbered and therefore overshadowed by the fact that I've witnessed exclusion and discrimination more often than I've witnessed even attempts to afford equitable access to resources and opportunities. And honestly, I accept it. Accept is the wrong word. Expect is the word. I've always expected that it would be a struggle to make my mark or achieve my goals, given that as a minority in this country and in my chosen profession, I would likely sail against discriminatory winds and bucking bigoted seas. So I'm from that generation of, we were taught life's not fair. So I learned to see that struggle as part of the journey. I've been conditioned. Whether inequity is a bug rather than a feature will be for the historians to write. I'm still at sea, but I'm optimistic, and with celebrations such as this on International Women's Day, I journey in peace and with intention to be part of the solution.
When I started my practice, the number of women in international law field was very reduced. Since then, I've seen the increase of women participation. If we take a look at the law school today, women are the majority. At law firms, we are more than 50% as well. However, although we are occupying positions in law firms, positions in the academy, although we can be the majority in numbers, we are not occupying leadership, managerial, or top positions. Very few women are in top positions. As for instance, in law firms, the number of women in managerial top positions or in partnership is only 34%. So I think that unfortunately we have to work towards equity. And we are going to get there when we have not only the same chances, the same opportunity, granted to men, but also equal salaries.
One way to do that is to join gender diversity organizations like Arbitral Women, which unites women in international dispute resolution to support each other in the development of our careers. I'm fortunate to sit as a board member on the Arbitral Women board and to support our members worldwide in furthering their careers.
In the past couple of years, what I've realized is that with, especially with ADR institutions, the more women are not afraid to come out and speak about their experiences and their experiences and expertise, the more they do that, the more opportunities they have. I mean, if you look at the ADR profession, I think is actually led by a lot of women. So I think if ADR institutions continue to bring forward names of women who have excelled in the ADR profession, it would not be so much of an issue. When we look at we call the boys' club, it's no longer a boys' club because now women are saying, oh, I know this woman who is good in this area. I know this ADR professional who is amazing. I know this mediator or this arbitrator, and you are seeing them everywhere now. And I think some of the leading ADR institutions right now are led by women. I mean, the Ciarb and a couple of others I can't think of right now. But I know that if the institutions continue to put forward names of women who have excelled in the profession, it would help.
In a more practical level, I have seen various levels of ensuring equity. So first, the basic level, when we just talked that it's good to have it. Then to have a commitment, let's promote equity. Then to report if you fulfilled your commitment, for instance, to different initiatives, to different rankings, etc., etc. And last is to publicly to publish information about your activity and whether you complied with this commitment. And it's also important that public scrutiny as such could make a wonder, could really change the situation. And probably this is like last resort for some problematic institutions or organizations, but it would work, I'm sure. And public scrutiny is a very powerful tool, and it could have an impact on many organizations and institutions and even personalities. And I have seen quite interesting effect of different public shaming, not in equity issues, but it's a powerful and really workable tool. And as a last resort, this could also change the situation for the better. But my general expectation that we need equity in all spheres of our life and profession, and that would obviously lead us to equity in either profession.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all the women out in our video who shared their thoughts with us. Before we get started with the panel discussion, a few housekeeping notes. You can explore the International Women's Virtual Platform using the navigation bar on the top and take a look at our speakers' profiles. Please use the chat function to the right if you want to chat with fellow attendees. Maybe let us know where you're joining us from today. Please use the Q&A box if you would like to ask a question, which is on the right of your screen. If you're struggling with anything at all, please use the help widget, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. The panel will give their personal perspectives on equity and also what it means in dispute resolution. So let me introduce you to them. Naomi Masumbi. Naomi serves as a research fellow at Swiss International Law School and is a PhD candidate at Maastricht. She's been advising and assisting clients on issues relating to international trade, regulatory compliance, enforcement and international arbitration. Caroline Kenny, KC. Caroline is a nationally accredited mediator, chartered arbitrator and King's Counsel. She is a fellow of Ciarb, director on the board of the ACICA, which is the Australian Centre for International Commercial Arbitration, the past president of Ciarb's Australian branch, and the current Ciarb trustee for Australasia. She is at present the only female chartered arbitrator in Australia. Ursula Karutumba. Ursula is a lawyer with more than 20 years of professional experience in sponsorship of clients in civil, commercial, administrative law, and over 8 years experience as an arbitrator in ad hoc and institutional arbitration. She's a partner in a Peruvian law firm. Molly Rigoamba. Molly is a legal and private sector expert with experience in Rwanda and across the region. She's the managing partner at RA Associates and Co-Advocates. She currently serves as the vice chair of the Rwanda Management Institute and is a member of the National Workforce Development Authority. And Wolf von Kumberg. Wolf is an independent arbitrator and mediator specializing in investor-state mediation and energy disputes within the aerospace and aviation industry. He is a Ciarb fellow and a former chair of Ciarb's board of management. I would like to invite each panelist to speak for 5 minutes to give their personal view on equity and discuss their personal and professional experiences on it. We'll start with Caroline. So over to Caroline. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm delighted to join this panel of women on International Women's Day from Melbourne, Australia. I think the theme of embrace equity is quite difficult because it assumes that there is gender and racial equality and that we can move to a different, perhaps a higher policy of now catering to individual differences. I don't think we have achieved gender equality, and I would like to examine the issue in ADR by reference to the underrepresentation of women as arbitrators in international commercial arbitration. In Australia, there are too few women who sit as arbitrators. I know about 5 women who sit as arbitrators. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, I'm still the only female chartered arbitrator in Australia, and that is an indication that women are not getting sufficient appointments to obtain the highest qualification possible from the Institute. In 2022, ICA updated its report on gender diversity on arbitral appointments and proceedings, which identified unconscious bias as the biggest barrier to women obtaining arbitral appointments, just as it was to the advancement of women in the legal profession and corporate life years ago. But it is heartening to note that the number of appointments of women is trending upwards. The report said that since 2015, the proportion of women appointed as arbitrators had more than doubled. However, that percentage is still less than 25%. The ICC reported an increase in female appointments from 10.4% in 2015 to 24.3% in 2021. So this is encouraging news to keep in mind on International Women's Day. But it is simply not good enough for IC arbitrations to involve such a small proportion of women as arbitrators. As an industry, we have to do better than that, because just as studies have demonstrated that corporations perform better when their board reflects the diversity of the population, so too will arbitrations perform more effectively if more women are selected as arbitrators. When I look at international arbitration today, I think there are parallels to be made between what it was like for me entering the profession 35 years ago and the difficulties I perceive today in women obtaining arbitral appointments. As a young woman entering the legal profession in Melbourne, Australia in 1984, there were very few senior women practicing as lawyers and even less as partners in law firms. Just as there are demonstrably less women than men practicing as arbitrators today. But this will change over time. When I first started practice, there were no female judges in the state of Victoria. Eventually, women were appointed to lower courts, but it took a very long time before women were on superior courts. When asked to explain why that was the case, the government and recruiters would inevitably say, because there are no suitable women. Just like the excuse for not appointing female arbitrators is that they do not have the experience. Unconscious bias is now called the killer of diversity. But when I started in the legal profession, the bias was very conscious and very overt. Part of the problem was that most of the clients were male, who were retaining male partners to work on their cases. Women were not clients in law firms because they were not making it to the top echelons of companies or organizations because they hit the so-called glass ceiling. When I joined the Victorian Bar as a barrister in 1987, it was predominantly a white male institution. Most of the briefs went to men. During my time at the bar, I saw many promising women come and leave the bar. The attrition rate was extremely high because if they didn't get the briefs, they could not cover the costs of practicing as a barrister, such as chambers, car parks, and childcare. One of the big catalysts for change at the bar was when a group of women, including myself, formed an association called the Women Barristers Association. It started to lobby for women to get appointed to bar committees and to the judiciary. Just like International Women's Day, it played an important role in bringing issues which affect women to the attention of those responsible for change. Fast forward 35 years, and we have a changed legal profession. There are now women on all courts in Australia, including 4 out of 7 judges on the High Court are women. The Chief Justice of Australia is a woman. Now the bar is very inclusive. On a yearly basis, there are often more women joining the bar than men, which reflects the statistics which show more women than men graduate with law degrees. Just as I have witnessed changes in the legal profession in the past 30 years, I believe that change will come to the international arbitration industry. There will be more female arbitrators and more female partners and clients in a position to appoint arbitrators, but change takes time. We have to remember that we are a relatively young industry. International arbitration dates back to the Middle Ages, but the modern version we know is relatively young. The New York Convention is in its 65th year, and the model law is 38 years old. So there's plenty of time for progress, but we really need those in positions to make appointments to understand if they are still using the same old pool of arbitrators who are mostly white males over a certain age. They are not necessarily getting the best arbitrators for their arbitration. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Caroline. Really interesting insight from Australia and indeed beyond. Let's hear from Ursula in Peru.
For me, it is a great pleasure to be here today. Spaces like these are important because they allow us to become aware of the situation based on the experiences of other women who, like us, are looking for a place in our profession and to seek paths that will lead us to it. These spaces also promote sorority among us, which in my opinion is essential. Embracing equity. I was thinking from my perspective as an arbitrator about the difference between equity and equality. Equality consists of treating people in the same way regardless of whether they are a man or a woman. On the other hand, equity proposes a differentiated treatment with the aim of achieving real equality in terms of opportunities in order to reduce gender gaps, promoting a greater participation of women in arbitral tribunals. In my opinion, it is a fact that there are barriers based on gender issues that take precedence over a person's abilities and skills, which justifies giving this differential treatment in order to balance the scale. However, I also think that from our side, we have tools that can help us overcome these barriers. From a constructive point of view, I will focus on what we can do to achieve changes. For me, the key words are training, empowerment, and sorority. Training. We must be constantly training ourselves to achieve a certain specialization in legal issues, which will allow us to be appointment as arbitrators for our abilities. If we do not train ourselves, we cannot claim equity when the solution depends on us. Many times, we do not find specialized women who can participate in a dispute because of the subject matter involved. And that is because the universe of specialized and experienced women is limited compared to the universe of male arbitrators, which is bigger. Empowerment. I firmly believe that the attitude with which we assume things, good or bad things, is crucial in our lives. The will to do things, to want to achieve objectives, to look for doors that can be opened, to make ourselves visible as referees of taking on complex issues is important. And sorority, creating support networks among ourselves. We must create alliances among ourselves and generate a change. In my personal experience, I must recognize that I have been very lucky. During my career, I had the opportunity to work in recognized law firms in Peru. I was able to work and be a mother at the same time. And I could do that because I had the support of my family and of the law firm in which I worked for more than 12 years. I was able to be a partner in a law firm during pandemia, and currently I have my law firm and I work as an arbitrator. I will not deny that it was a difficult role, but it was possible. Although it is true that I didn't directly come across gender issues, it is a reality that there are barriers that still need to be overcome. There is still a long way to go, and there is still a gap to overcome. And we all have to work so that this gap becomes shorter and the number of female arbitrators participating in arbitral tribunals can be equalized. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Ursula. I really like the idea of training, empowerment, and creating those support networks. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective. Let's hear from Molly.
Thank you, Catherine. Happy Women's Day to all the women listening, and thanks to the men that support women to fly to greater heights. This issue of equity, I think it's a very, very, I think, important issue to discuss. In the past, we've heard about equality, gender equality, but just like the others have mentioned, gender equality only applies if we are all starting at the same footing. And when I say all, I mean men and women. If we are all starting at the same footing, then equality applies. But when we are starting from different bases, mostly today men start maybe 5 steps higher and women are still below. So when you talk about equity can only apply when you all start on the same footing. I'll just give you a few statistics from the Rwandan experience so that you can be able to understand how equity can be the only thing that can be applied or embraced for us to reach a common goal more than equality. So the arbitration profession is quite new in Rwanda. And I think our arbitration center only started about around 2005 or 2008. So when I talk about the statistics, then you'll be able to understand where we're coming from. So today we have a total of 162 arbitrators in Rwanda, and only 23 of those are women. We have 29 adjudicators, and only 3 of those are women. We have 32 mediators, and only 5 of those are women. We have, last year alone, And when I talk about the cases that were handled, 22 cases were handled, and only 4 cases were handled by women. And I would say in that statistic, 2 of those cases were handled by me. So you can imagine how the footing or the base is totally different, and only equity can get us out of this hurdle. And I think from a national perspective in all the other sectors, I think if you've heard about Rwanda, we've really taken major steps to ensure equity for women, and by mainstreaming gender in all the national planning documents and all the policies. So today, because of that affirmative action, which I can say is actually equity based, we have 61.2% of women in parliament, and in the Senate we have 36% are women, and in the Rwandan cabinet, those are ministers, 52%, but all because of affirmative action, which is basically a process of embracing equity. But when we come to the justice sector, and of course, with a special focus on arbitration, you realize that actually we still have a very long way to go. For example, when you look at the justice sector, we are still not so bad. 47% of the judiciary is composed of women. And but when it comes to arbitration, we are really, really still at the tail end. And even our constitution is very clear that at least in every decision-making organ, we should have at least 30% as women. And this has really been applied across. But when it comes to the private sector, and where arbitration would fall, you find that we are still not getting to this mark. And the reason being that there's still low capacity as far as women in terms of developing capacity. Women still shy away from this kind of profession. For example, today we have the highest qualification in arbitration is at the fellowship level, and we have 12 fellows, and I'm the only fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitration. So as a woman, and the rest are men. Now, you look around and you're like, we have so many women lawyers. What is the problem? And then you realize that women are not that competitive, but what can actually drive them to be competitive? I think it's the skills, the training. I think my colleagues have talked about capacity development for women, which is still one of the issues that we're still lacking. And the other thing also, I think arbitration centers, whether it's ICC, London Court of Arbitration, even the Chartered Institute of Arbitration, by the way, I think they should be very intentional in setting up policies that create affirmative action to ensure that there's inclusivity for both genders, not just women, even men, because the trend here in Rwanda seems that there's a lot of affirmative action for women at the government level, to the extent that you feel like probably men might be endangered species. So equity should apply across the board. When you talk about equity, we're just not looking at women, but looking at all genders to ensure that there's inclusivity. And then also, I think, as I said, these arbitration centers should actually mainstream gender equity in all the center policies, whether it's governance at the governance level. How many women do we have sitting on the boards of these centers? At management level, how many women do we have in management? And then arbitration cases. How I know there's usually a fair selection of arbitrators, but how intentional are we to promote women into these arbitration cases? And then also changing cultures. I've had a personal experience where I've sat in an international arbitration case, and of course, the other two arbitrators were men. And one of these men, I think, comes from a country where really women are not given that, I don't want to say value, are not given that recognition in terms of what they have to bring on the table. And every time we are deliberating on all the decisions, he kept turning to my other colleague. And when I'd look at our profiles, I felt like, you know what, I think I'm actually better than my colleagues in terms of qualification, in terms of experience. But I felt like he was really not giving value to my contribution in the case. So just even not only focusing on capacity development of women, we also need to focus on capacity development for men also to embrace equity, whether it's in how we handle these arbitration cases, on how we, consider inclusivity. So in a nutshell, what I'll say is that we've come a long way at the international level even, because I was looking at the World Economic Forum report and only 15% of women are in STEM, science, technology, math, and and engineering. And then you're like, if at the world level, it's like this. And these are some of the equipment or the enablers that help us to get to where we are. What can we do at the international level to actually ensure that women are integrated into all these programs? Women are encouraged to be competitive, not to shy away to competition, because there's something that we've seen as women. Most women tend to shy away from competition. The moment you feel, there's aggressive competition, you're like, you know what? I really don't want to go into this cutthroat game. It's for the men. So how do we change that mindset and get back into a level playing field, just like the men? So I think I'll stop to that so my colleagues can also come in. And I thank you. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Molly. I think some really interesting questions that you've posed there, around the issue of, say, affirmative action and, and competitiveness, and how, we differ perhaps, or some of us differ from a gender perspective around how we approach things like competition. But I'm really interested to hear from the audience as well about their views on affirmative action and what we can do, and, that issue of inclusiveness. Let's move over to Wolf and hear from Wolf very early in the morning in the States.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And it's a real honor to be here today on International Women's Day. And I feel a little awed, perhaps, as the one male representative, not only male, but aging white male on this panel. And it's much like speaking to my children about climate change. And my children are in their 20s, and I talk to them about, what's happened over the last, 40 years as I've been an adult with climate, and why have we got to the stage we're at with climate. And, reflecting on what I'm hearing here today and preparing for this, I reflected a bit on, my own travel as a legal professional, growing up in Canada, but spending most of my professional life in Europe, and that journey with respect to diversity, equality, and equity. And how the profession, and I talk here in a broad sense, the legal profession, the ADR profession has changed over that 40-year journey. I've been with the Chartered Institute now for about 30 years. And as Catherine said, I was chair of the board of management for 5 years. And I must say that in that period of time, the Institute itself has changed tremendously. When I first started 30 years ago, it was primarily men. There were very, very few women members of the Institute, certainly no women in any of the key roles in the Institute. But that has changed over time. And I'm really proud to say that when I ended my term as the chair of the board of management, I had encouraged Jane Gunn to take my role after me, and I think that reflected very much the changes in the Institute, and seeing Catherine here today and in her role, I think that reflects very strongly on what the Institute itself is doing to ensure that it is bringing not only women, but I think a lot of other diversity into the organization. And I spent almost 30 years as in-house counsel for a number of international global technology companies. And I saw in that field an enormous change as well, working for companies that were made up primarily of engineers. The diversity that has now been brought into that particular industry has also, I think, reflected the changes that we've seen generally in society. And I must say the company I worked for, which was a Fortune 500 American company, today has a female president. The general counsel is female. The deputy general counsel is female. And many of the sector vice presidents are female. And I think that's an important change in what we are discussing here today as well, because as companies reflect also the makeup of society, they will then also come to choose ADR specialists, and we're talking here not only about arbitrators, but very much also mediators, adjudicators, dispute board members. All of these will reflect society more generally if we also have people within the client community, in the community that actually appoints the individuals, the neutrals. We will find that there will be an increase in diversity in those appointments as well. I think, as all of you already have reflected in the legal profession and in the law firms, there's still perhaps a lack of sufficient women in senior legal positions. And it's also the lawyers, of course, that are the gatekeepers to many of the appointments of neutrals. And as that changes, that will also, I think, add to the number of diverse appointments for neutral positions. And I think that's important to understand. I think just reflecting on some of the areas where we can help to bring about improvement in diverse appointments. I think we have to encourage organizations such as companies, but also the law firms, to actively seek out qualified, diverse, and in this case, female candidates for neutral positions. We heard already that that mentorship plays an important role, and that plays an important role, of course, for all of us. And I think particularly for women, and we've heard already about some initiatives for women to provide mentorship to each other. I think, networking, as we know, is important for all of us as we seek to obtain neutral positions. And I think that's something the Chartered Institute, for example, plays a very big role. And I mean, this is, I've always felt over my years as a member that that's been one of the key roles the Institute has played for me, is really in networking. And I think that's across the board, no matter what our own diverse background might be. Networking is extremely important. I think funding is also an important issue, and we can say that we open up the possibilities for diversity in various professions, But if people, as we'd heard from Caroline, don't have the ability to pay for or to support themselves in a particular profession, then they simply won't be there. And so I think, finding ways not only to mentor, but also to help fund diverse groups to enable them to be part of the ADR profession. That's another thing, and perhaps something the Institute could also look at. Clearly, seminars and workshops that bring attention to the richness of what diverse backgrounds can bring to a particular profession is also extremely helpful. I think diversity actually plays an important role in enriching every part of society, and it really brings a big difference, as somebody already has said, to tribunals and to certainly the mediation profession as well. It's an interesting point, actually. Maybe I just raise quickly, and that is I've seen certainly mediation develop over my career. When I first started, mediation was pretty nascent. It really didn't happen, but it's developed into a very vibrant profession. Particularly in North America and in Europe. And I suggest, and I don't know the statistics and whether that bears it out, but given it's a newer profession than arbitration, it's developed, I think, with greater equality and diversity than the arbitral profession has, which has been around for much longer and is certainly still very much male-oriented. I think if we look at the numbers of female mediators compared to female arbitrators, that the statistics would probably show that there are higher numbers of female mediators than arbitrators. And that's because I think it's a newer profession and it's developed in a different way, and there probably is more inclusivity within mediation than there is in arbitration. So I think it demonstrates what can be achieved. And I think the other point is that companies and law firms do have to formally set out goals, and those goals have to be measured as to the diversity in their appointments. I think that's a very important aspect that also will encourage greater numbers of diverse individuals in appointments. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Wolf. A really interesting insight. I mean, I think it's important to just sort of consider the role that professional bodies like Ciarb can play, institutions, law firms, but also, large companies in terms of thinking about equity and embracing equity. And I think, just on the stats around mediation, I think you're right. We will see sort of a percentage-wise a greater number of women mediators, and that's probably a reflection of the nature of mediation, but also how that profession has developed over time. So thank you for that insight. And anyway, let's now hear from Naomi. Over to you.
Okay, sorry about that. It's a pleasure to be here on this particular day and sharing this panel with these brilliant speakers. So I just want to talk about a little bit about the notion of diversity and equity. So nowadays, the words diversity and equity in international arbitration conjure up images of tribunals composed of people from different backgrounds, cultures, and genders. While these physical and social characteristics certainly represent an important component of diversity, they are only part of diversity's rich tapestry. In fact, physical and social aspects of diversity only make up about half of the diversity present in international arbitration. So Where do we get that elusive and important other half from? Well, the remainder lies in diversity of thoughts. As we move, as you guys move, go to another slide. So perhaps the best way to illustrate the importance of the diversity of thought is to briefly touch on the legacy left by one of legal giants of the modern age, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So what made the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg the most important legal figure in the promotion of equity within the fabric of American society? Well, she certainly made history on many accounts. Justice Ginsburg was the first person to serve on both the Harvard and Columbia Law Reviews. She became the first tenured female law professor at Columbia University. And while at Rutgers, she was the first lawyer to fight for equal pay. However, none of these impressive accomplishments paved the way for her to become a champion for women's rights and to become the notorious RBG as she's now widely known. In fact, it was only when she was appointed as a Supreme Court justice that she was able to interpret and champion the American Constitution, which was largely built on the conservative justice, to move the needle and deliver equity more widely. So how did she manage to do so? Justice Ginsburg made a critical contribution to 6 landmark cases. Her contributions mostly manifested as a voice of dissent. In her legendary dissent, she brought different viewpoints to the table. So first, she challenged the male-only military admissions policy. She fought against wage discrimination, and she advocated for same-sex marriage so ardently. So what she did was she brought new dimensions to judicial thinking about the rule of law. Her thinking was actually influenced by the profound challenges that she had to face during her career. So earlier in her career, despite this stellar academic background, she was denied the opportunity to clerk for a US Supreme Court justice simply because she was a woman. And when she was at Rutgers, she had to hide her pregnancy due to some negative ramifications that she could have faced. So essentially, she basically was subjected to numerous challenges in her career. And in her own words, her legacy can be described as the lived experience of the law should have a place at the table. So she now, and in light of this, as a powerful source of legal authority, she addressed issues involving political morality by forming a persuasive discourse drawing from her own personal experiences, countering the traditional legal sources that were deeply embedded in sex discrimination doctrine. So the legacy of notorious RBJ reflects the critical role that doctrinal sources can play in enhancing equity. So as you know, equity essentially recognizes that we do not all start from the same place. Justice Ginsburg did not start from the same place that all of the other Supreme Court figures started. And equity also confirms that we must acknowledge and make adjustment to address such imbalance. And that's exactly what Justice Ginsburg did. Moving on to next slide. One of the main disparities in international arbitration, as you can see, is the lack of diverse doctrinal sources. These doctrinal scholarship in international arbitration, as you might be able to notice, is dominated by a small, closed cohort of scholars and practitioners. And some might this begs the question, do their scholarship really reflect the legal legacy of international arbitration that oftentimes lies at the intersection of public international law, public law, and the field of human rights? So it's important for us to note that doctrinal sources serve a central role in rationalizing a source of law and interpreting the relevant legal principles. These scholarships can drive and dictate the conduct of state actors and continue to play an important role in legitimizing arbitration itself. Therefore, diverse legal scholarship can help enhance the legitimacy of arbitration itself and its institutional values. So I essentially would like to conclude by reminding everyone that we cannot have only adjudicators of different ethnicities and of various ages with an equal number of male and female voices at the table. Yet we can have all of these great things essentially when it comes to diversity and also equity. But considering having all of these amazing traits and characteristics of diversity, we still cannot be fully maximizing our opportunities to drive diversity if we are not also considering diversity of thoughts. So in light of this, an international culture shift is required to move the needle in an equitable way. Embracing a new generation of doctrinal sources and taking dissonant views into account may help tribunals to enhance the intellectual vigor of their decision-making and formulate awards and deliberations that are sociologically convincing. And moving to the last slide, I would like to conclude my remark by this important quote that, yes, it's amazing to have diversity and recognize equity, but after all, what good is promoting diversity and equity if we all think in the same way? So with that question, I conclude my remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naomi. I think, celebrating on International Women's Day, some of the decisions of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is very, very fitting. I think she's absolute legend, and some amazing decisions came out of her, which really sort of shifted, I think, a sort of global perspective, not just necessarily in the States. And thank you for sharing that and that diversity of thought. I think that's absolutely crucial. That's a recognition that we don't all think the same, and actually, we get to better decision making if we have that level of diversity. So thank you for sharing that insight. So thank you to all the panel for your thoughts and your insights. We're going to sort of move over to some questions. So please keep the questions coming in the Q&A box as well. I'm going to start with Caroline, and perhaps a slightly controversial question, but let's get the ball rolling. So Caroline, do you think it's premature to embrace equity? Do you think it's premature to embrace equity? Do we need still to strive for equality of opportunity? Caroline, what do you think? You're on mute, Caroline. It always happens. Thanks.
Can you hear me now, Catherine?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
So I think this is quite a difficult question because, to my way of thinking, we need both equality and equity. Equality is about ensuring that everybody has an equal opportunity. Equity recognises that people start with differences and they have different needs. I think that we can't move to embracing a policy of equity before we've succeeded in making sure that equality is foundational. And I think we're quite a way off that. During my speech, Catherine, I referred to the statistics regarding appointments of female arbitrators. And I think for an organisation as large as the ICC in 2021 to say that it's only appointing 24% of arbitrators are women is just not satisfactory. We need to do better than that. Thanks, Catherine.
I mean, absolutely. There's statistics. Though we've seen an increase, we're really not there in relation to parity. So I think you're right. I think it is about quality. It is about equity. It's about all of those things that we've been talking about around how do we embrace diversity and really sort of move towards gender parity. So thank you. Maybe Molly, you had some really interesting insights in Rwanda. I was just wondering if what you thought around, what legal framework has your country put in place to embrace gender equity? What are you doing in Rwanda to help?
Thank you, Catherine. As I'd already mentioned before, the only way we can achieve equity is when we have the proper legal frameworks, policies in place. And I think Rwanda, we've tried from a national perspective and in all the other areas. For example, our constitution requires that 30% of all the decision-making organs need to have 30% women. And this cuts across the board from parliament, cabinet, key government institutions, the financial sector, the banks, the insurance companies, all that. But interestingly enough, sometimes even with this 30%, of course, in government, sometimes they surpass the 30%, but sometimes in private sector, in the insurance companies and banking sector, venture capital funds, etc., the financial sector, it will be a challenge because even getting these women who have the skills to reach the 30% becomes a problem. And then also you find sometimes it's just about ticking the boxes. Do we meet the 30%? Let's tick, tick, tick. Without looking at the merits, do these women actually have the capacity? So, okay, there's the good side to the affirmative action through legal frameworks, but also it's also important on the other side to see whether actually these are perfect fits, if it's not about ticking the boxes. But our Vision 2050 now also mainstreams gender. There has to be gender parity in all sectors, agriculture, mining, manufacturing. I don't have time to give you all the statistics, but when you look at the statistics, the women participation in all these sectors, construction, all the GDP movers in terms of the GDP, the sectors that move GDP, you'll find that women are usually less than 20% even. In terms of their participation. So the legal frameworks are there. They're really good. Even the policies at the farm level, most companies have policies that actually cater for this at the governance level. You find that I can't tell you how many boards I sit on because they keep coming, okay, we want women on our board, but where are the women? So you find that it's a few women who are stretched across the boards. So from a legal perspective, I think we've really tried. The only way now that we need to try to work on is capacity building for the women. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting to hear sort of a country that's actually adopted that affirmative action around the 30%. When you think, we're talking about 30%, we're not talking about 50%. But the fact that actually there still needs some capacity building to support women to get there and participate. So thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to move over to Ursula. And Ursula, one of the I think the big and pressing issues for all of us, but particularly for women, is how to get that first appointment and how to actually get appointed as a neutral. So could you maybe share some tips with us about how to get appointed? How did you go about doing that? What's your insight around how to get those appointments?
Yes, I can give you some tips. Presence of more women in the professional sense in order to obtain more visibility and increase the possibilities of election. Let's develop networking skills, participate in conference, training programs, write articles, among others. The second tip that I can say is combat, the barrier of experience that others male professionals have, let us train ourselves. Let us achieve that specialization that is necessary to participate in highly complex arbitrations. And as Elizabeth Chan mentioned, integrate organizations that promote equal opportunities and spaces that reduce the gender gap, such as Arbitral Women. At Arbitral Women Peru, we developed here a directory of female arbitrators. It's a tool to promote gender diversity in the appointment of arbitrators at the national arbitration level. This directory is a valuable database that consolidates information in a single document of female arbitrators in Peru registered in the main arbitration centers of the country, which can be useful in the process of selecting arbitrators. That is, for me, the main tips that can help us to approach more appointments in boards. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. I mean, I think, the organizations like Arbitral Women and the pledges, I think, are really, really important in raising the profile of women and, making it possible. I think it's difficult to be what you can't see, and having those sort of prominent women arbitrators, also quite visual in actually discussions like this is really, really helpful to know that it is possible for those people that are aspiring to become appointed as arbitrators or indeed mediators or indeed adjudicators. So thank you for that. Let's move to Naomi, and Naomi sort of talked a little bit about some of the academic thinking and diversity of thought, and I was just wondering, how does engaging with contemporary and emerging scholarships help tribunals to foster equity and enhance the institutional value of arbitration as a whole?
Thanks for that. So, as many of the audience know, that arbitration is a very dynamic field and it's constantly evolving. And most of the issues that the arbitration touches on, they involve, social norms and economic factors, right? And these issues actually kind of involve transnational issues. And when arbitration, as so many people have alluded to and characterized, many giants of international arbitration is a so-called system of transnational justice. So when arbitrators are faced with a difficult question involving political morality, it's good to basically consider all moral and legal conception as a potential answers. So when they endorse alternative moral views, and sometimes when they take into account the voice of dissonance, they're actually increasing public confidence because they are allowing the voice of sometimes disfranchised, that they don't necessarily have any place in the table, so to speak, to be accounted for and to be considered. So that's how equity can be enhanced. You're allowing people's the voice of those, or grievances of those that are not being heard, to be heard and to be adjudicated upon. So endorsing those sort of literature allows arbitral tribunals to basically act in a more fair and equitable manner, and in turn, it can enhance the public confidence in the outcome of their work.
Certainly, that role around accessing justice and enabling, voices that can't normally be heard to be heard, and putting some mechanisms in place is really, really, key in sort of thinking about how the system should work from an equity perspective. Thank you, Naomi. Let's hear from Wolf, and maybe sort of shift over to hearing from the panelists about their personal experiences. So Wolf, what have been your personal experiences in business? You mentioned business, and how have business sort of promoted equity of say employees, and what's your sort of personal experience of how that can work effectively? I think you're just on mute as well, Wolf.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that is perhaps an important lesson that we can learn. Again, just drawing on my own experience in business, for 30 years and seeing, as I said, the change really from a very male-oriented world to one that was much more diverse by the time I left. And certainly gender balance was something that had greatly improved. And I think that's because, and when we look at equity in particular, and not all starting from the same place, business recognizing the value of diversity and bringing diverse thought into the business decision-making actually benefited the business. And I think that understanding, that inclusion actually is something that benefits the business, is one that then really was a catalyst for change. And I think maybe just reflecting on some of the areas that allowed that to happen is we talk about equal pay for equal work, but that's easy to say. But it's actually something that is much more difficult to do, because businesses often will grade jobs in different ways, and typically gender and women have suffered as a result of that, because despite the fact that they might be doing the same job as a man, because of the way their position was graded, they would be paid less. And so a recognition that in actually classifying what people do, there was a certain bias that helped to break down that pay gap, and a recognition that you have to look at the overall quality of what somebody was doing, and paying them in a fashion that was recognition of what they were doing was an important element. Flexible work schedules, I think, were another area that were important, particularly for women as they came to having families, and a recognition that being able to provide a flexible workplace actually, again, benefited the company, because you continue to allow women then to take part in the business, despite the fact that they started to have families. Professional development and encouraging, I think, women to develop their own professional capabilities, and paying for that. In particular, I think businesses came to understand that that was a real benefit to them as well, and that was an important element. I think paid parental leave, that was something that came into vogue, of course, in many countries, but also recognition by companies that would be beneficial not only for men, for women, but also for men, because that allowed then the female to go back to the workplace, perhaps, and the male would stay at home for a period of time. And I think just a recognition and rewarding employees across their diversity, and by making it clear that everybody could contribute in different ways. And I think that's the important thing for equity in particular, that we all bring something to the table in a different way. We don't all speak with the same voice, as Naomi said earlier, and it's the fact that we don't, that we are then more inclusive, and I think in all of us enriched as a result of that. But it's the recognition of that that is often lacking.
Thanks, Wolf. I mean, certainly we know that there's lots of studies out there that show that the more diverse the decision-making group, the better the decision will be, the more sustainable that will be. And that's, I think, sort of, starting to be embraced and recognised by business. So I don't think we're quite there yet. I think the issues around pay and reward are quite interesting, because we still know that for the most part there is a pay gap certainly in arbitration. I suspect there's maybe less information out there in some of the other disciplines, but then we know that women are paid less proportionately than men, as they are for generally in relation to work. And I think that's even more so when you add ethnicity and race into the equation as well. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that regard. I'm just going to shift, and I'm just going to put a question to each panel member that's come in from the audience. And I think we touched on it a little bit with Ursula's insight earlier, but we've been asked, about what advice the panel would give for women interested in joining the profession. And, I think what we mean by that is the dispute resolution profession, but particularly for those women of colour. So, maybe just a bit of insight from yourself. What advice would you give to somebody considering coming into this profession? Maybe let's start with Caroline. What advice would you be giving?
Well, I'd be the advice I'd give is to get qualified to do the CIRB courses, because the CIRB courses are the gold standard of arbitration courses in the world, and all of them. I've taught all of them, but all of them are very interesting. You meet fantastic people. Even the intro course, it's just a one-day course. The diploma course, which goes for 9 days, is a brilliant course in itself. So that would be my first tip, is to get qualified. And then it's networking. And that means going to a lot of conferences. And it also means getting known in the arbitration community, which is not as hard as you might think. It's actually a smaller community than many would think.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, absolutely. Get trained and get to know everyone. I think that's fantastic advice. Molly, what would you say? What advice would you be giving?
Thank you, Catherine. I don't think I couldn't agree more with Caroline. I think, like just every other profession, you need to invest in yourself. Yeah. My kids keep telling me, but mommy, you're always doing one course after the other. But in this competitive world, that's what you need to do. So take the arbitration course, look at your areas of interest, whether it's construction, whether it's employment, specialize in those ones. And then, of course, network and, read a lot, and then you'll get there. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Thank you, Molly. Ursula, you've given a few tips already, but any sort of greater insight around people that are sort of coming into the profession, really sort of, starting out?
Yes, I will return to for me, the 3 keywords: training to get qualified, as Caroline and Molly have said, empowerment, fight for it, don't give up, and sorority. Try to create these connections with other women. Help others. If you help others, the others will help you. We have to start with us, with our attitude. I think that it's my best what I'm gonna say. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that idea of sort of supporting each other, and I think in that regard we do need our male allies to support women too. And it's maybe that's sort of timely to hand over to Wolf and as a male ally, and ask what his advice would be to women sort of coming into the sector.
Well, I think you actually put your finger on it, Catherine. It is actually also having the assistance of your other colleagues, and that's very important. I think, as in every field, I mean, mentorship is key. to help bring you along, and whether that's you're a male, female, or if any other diverse aspect is important. I think mentorship and getting some people who are already in the field and getting them to help you. It may just be in observing what they do, because that's an important way of learning. And I think I think the Institute is also playing an important role in that, in helping to put newly qualified individuals in touch with people who've been in the profession for some time. And I think that's an important element of it.
Yeah, thank you, Walter. I mean, I think the mentoring, there's a number of a number of our branches do mentoring schemes. There's we have a MentorLoop sort of platform, for people aspiring to connect with sort of more experienced practitioners. So use those sort of things. And I think other initiatives like shadowing, pupilages, which are available in many places, try and look for those as well, and get yourself as much experience as you possibly can. Naomi, what are your thoughts on this important issue?
Yeah, I agree that mentorship serves as a great inspiration for people, for any sort of up-and-coming practitioner. But I have to say, I talked to a lot of female leading practitioners, and one thing that I noticed that, yes, they were figures that they were inspired by, but at the end of the day, they carved their own path and they cultivated their own style. So the great thing about learning from others is that you learn some, the ins and outs of the things, but at the end of the day, it's how much you invest and what is your vision. So for people, especially people of minority, I would say you will definitely face some challenges. The reason we are here and talking about diversity and equity is that there's still the level playing field is hard to basically reach at this moment. So have a very solid plan, have faith in yourself, but at the same time be flexible. If you see some hurdles and if there were some setbacks, they're giving you this sort of inspiration to perhaps come up with alternative paths, but make sure to carve your own path while you're inspired by others.
Thank you. I think that being flexible, having a plan, but being flexible, but also being yourself and finding your own way. I think that's great advice. So thank you for that. I'm conscious that we haven't got much time left, so I'm just going to maybe do a sort of quick question to all of the panel about what they think either institutions or professional bodies or other organisations could maybe do to help support a greater level of equity in the profession, and maybe just sort of getting Caroline's view to start with. What more can the organisations do to support this?
I think institutions like the ICC, HKIC, LCIA can make sure more women are appointed. This excuse, I call it, that they're not experienced enough, it is just an excuse. Yet institutions have the ability to play a big role in ensuring equitable treatment of men and women, and therefore giving more plausibility to the arbitration process.
Thank you. Thank you. Molly, any thoughts on?
Thank you. I think I've already mentioned the issue of policies. If all the centers would work on their policies to ensure representation or parity at the governance level, management level, but also back to Caroline, while allocating cases, have this at the back of your mind. Of course, parties at the end of the day have the discretion to choose who they want, and probably sometimes it works against women, but it's also important to put in a word, indicate their capabilities, and it shouldn't just stop at the at the level of sharing the list and that's it. Put in a word, these ladies can actually do it, these men can actually do it, depending on the trend. So I think this is very, very key. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. So make the appointments, get some policies in place. Ursula, any further thoughts? What can institutions and organizations be doing?
Yes, at the same as Caroline Amori has said, the international centers must have a proactive role, promoting policies that guarantee a gender quota in the appointments of arbitrators. I think it's crucial, it's important to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Wolf, can you add to that?
I think part of it goes back to education and ensuring that there is a diverse pool of ADR neutrals, whether it's an arbitration, mediation, adjudication, dispute boards. And I think, and we were talking a little bit about the financial barriers, perhaps, and helping those particular groups to be able to be trained, and that's where it starts. But I think it's also knowledge building in the community overall. So it's the institutions actually interfacing with the legal profession, because that's where a lot of the appointments, of course, are made, but perhaps also with the business community and ensuring that the business community understands the value of diversity. And I think that's where institutions can play a big role.
Thanks, Wolf. I think there's increasing drive actually from organizations, from there's organizations that will actually ultimately appoint the arbitrator, mediator, or adjudicator to ensure that there is diversity there, and I think that's really important. Naomi, maybe you can add, also from a sort of an educational institutional perspective, in terms of what more can be done.
I do agree that these international institutions are best suited to implement affirmative actions because they have all the resources to identify and recognize what are those disparities and why certain, let's just say, groups or communities might not have the same opportunities as other ethnicities or other genders or culture or whatnot. So they can have a very streamlined plan to understand those shortcomings, and then they can remedy it by allowing those people to get the necessary knowledge, certificate or whatnot, the training, and at the same time maybe give them a little bit of a positive or affirmative actions, meaning that of course more opportunities, or acknowledging the fact that they probably would not have the same opportunities as their counterparts. So I think that probably could be one of the solutions.
No, that's fantastic. That thinking about opportunities for all and how we can embrace that. So time's nearly up. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank our panel today. What a fantastic discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I think it's been really sort of broad ranging and a truly a worldview actually on this issue of embracing equity. So thank you to them, but also thank you to the women who contributed to the video. I thought their insight was fascinating, and again another sort of global view of this issue. And what's clear to me is that there's lots of similarities of the sort of things that we can be doing globally to truly embrace equity and ensure parity across the genders, but a greater level of fairness for all. So thank you for all of your comments. Thank you for participating today, and happy International Women's Day. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you all. Thanks. Bye.